A would-be Memphis father is taking a different look at the city's paternity issues. The title of his book is I'm Not the Father, Narratives of Men Falsely Accused of Paternity. Don't believe me? This is the book right here. It's a title that's sure to turn heads, and author Marcus Matthews is here to talk all about it with me and his experiences. Good to see you. How's everything going? Welcome.
Thank you for having me here. Everything is going really well.
You know the title of this book is going to turn heads. I am not the father. That in and of itself is inflammatory to a lot of people, that phrase.
Yeah, I mean, right off the muscle, some people say, I'm not the father. What are you trying to say? What are you promoting? Well, take a moment, just look back and reflect a little bit and look at what it says after I'm not the father. But yeah, definitely the title in and of itself gets people.
Your story is in here. Why did you decide to share your story and find other men to share theirs?
Well, I was actually writing the book about my life. I grew up in North Memphis in the Fraser area, and at the tail end of my doctoral career. I'll be a doctor in 2012, and that was the story. Young man grows up in the hood, becomes a doctor. Let's talk about that and inspire some young people. But in the process, this story jumped off the page at me because I hadn't realized how much it really affected me. So I looked deeper, and I knew guys who had gone through the situation. The guys in the book are people that I know and grew up with right here in Memphis. And so I'm saying this happens a lot. Let's talk about it. Let's get to the bottom of the situation.
All right, so you're 17 years old. A girl comes to you who you've had a relationship with and says, I'm pregnant, it's yours. How do you deal with that? And then 9 months later, how do you deal with the fallout thereof?
Well, there were so many emotions that ran through me. I was confused. I was afraid. I was doubtful. There were so many things going on, and fortunately for me, I had a very strong family structure. I was able to talk to my parents about it, and that's why we decided to pursue the DNA test.
Okay, so let's talk about that process, because there are a lot of people, a lot of men who are probably in similar situations and don't have the courage to say, I may not be the father, or even to question that.
Yes, and it's imperative that people do. What a lot of people don't know is there's a 72% exclusion rate in Memphis, which means about 7 out of 10 guys who go to juvenile court for the test are not the father. Now, nationally, it's about 17%, which is it's still a problem, but it's more of a problem here in the city of Memphis. So it's something that young men, families, and young women too, anyone with young people who are engaged in this activity, whether the parents know it or not, they need to talk about it.
Socially, though, let's talk about the results of this kind of issue and these circumstances. How does that affect you as a man? Since you've gone through it, how does this kind of thing affect you? Realizing that you're not the father of a child that you thought you might be, or that was alleged to have been yours.
Well, the book helped me tremendously. Before the book, I have to admit that I was bitter. I did have some trust issues in relationships, and the men in the book all reacted differently. You know, a couple of the guys said, you know, that's one person, every woman's not that way, and that helped me. You know, and some of the other guys said, you know, I was angry, I was bitter myself, I didn't want to be in a committed relationship. So it affects different people in different ways, and that's why I wanted people to really understand that these all are different situations. I had a guy who's dating this girl since 7th grade, you know, went to a senior prom, had a DNA test, not his child. He was tremendously affected. You know, some of the other couples, the relationships weren't as solid. So it doesn't really matter what the foundation of the relationship is. It can happen, and it happens often.
If there's a lesson to be learned, what might it be?
I think that the lesson we want to look at is we have to communicate better. Poor communication leads to poor information, which leads to poor decisions. You know, nobody wakes up and says, you know, I want to make a poor decision today, you know. But if we don't have that communication within our families, mothers need to be able to talk to their daughters realistically about what they're doing. Fathers need to be able to talk to their sons and vice versa about what's going on in those families. And this book helps start the conversation about dating, about sex, about relationships that a lot of families are too embarrassed to hold, and they're embarrassed until someone's pregnant or someone's accused of getting someone pregnant, and now you want to backtrack. Well, this book helps you start that conversation, and I'm really glad that it's done. I've talked to parents who've read the book with their daughters, who've read it with their sons, and they're able to talk more openly about dating and relationships and sex, so it's winning.
You know, the reality is, in a case like this, in which a father or a man thinks that he in fact is the father of a child and later on finds out that he's not, but has signed the birth certificate, it moves from being just an issue between a couple to being a legal issue at that point.
Yes, it does, because you've legally claimed that child.
Right.
And there's a process that is now becoming a little easier with the DNA testing. But there was one point in time, if you signed that certificate, it was a done deal. That was your child regardless of what DNA said. So we have to be careful and take those precautions early and starting those conversations about the possibilities that are out there. Not saying that, well, I don't trust this woman, but we have to really acknowledge the world that we live in and hold that conversation with our children and with our friends.
Something I neglected, and before I let you go, I want to talk about this as well. There's also got to be an impact on the child.
Yes.
And that's probably a factor that we haven't talked a lot about. What have you seen through the stories of the men whose stories you document in the book? How has the child been impacted and affected by what has happened?
It's terrible for the children, and that's the part that's not fun in games, because the lives of these young people are involved. There was one child who was named after the falsely accused father. So this young man is walking around with a name that does not belong to him as a junior. So you have to explain that, and this child has to understand that and hold that conversation with mom. Why am I named after this guy, but this guy's coming to pick me up? In my case, which was very traumatic, the mother died in a tragic accident before the paternity tests were, before the results were revealed. So now you have a question of how do we go about finding out who else may be responsible? How do we approach that? And now you have a young child whose mother's gone.
And there's no way of finding his or her father.
Unless, a friend or a family member who knows something, steps up and says, hey, well, I know she was dating Marcus, but she was also dating this guy. So maybe we can contact him. And we have to work on good faith, hoping that people step up and say.
Wow. What a story. Folks, this right here is the book. It's called I'm Not the Father, Narratives of Men Falsely Accused of Paternity. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate you sharing the story. Folks, coming up next, the days of TV commercials blasting through your home may be over. We'll tell you about the legislation that's in the works. That's next.